In order to talk about the nature of a corporation, it's important to first understand the nature of human beings. Humans by nature always act in their best interest. And when someone acts in the interest of another person, it's likely that it's because both interests are aligned. Having aligned interests incentivizes people to act in a way that benefits multiple parties and not just themselves. Over the course of centuries, humans and civilizations have created and developed systems moving towards systems in which people have incentives to optimize the total benefit of a collective group. In the case of corporations, the system is structured in a way that shareholders are the main beneficiaries and not all stakeholders, because the structure prioritizes the firm's bottom line above all. For today's corporate structure, it's not in the firm's best interest to look after anyone but themselves. The underlying issue is that corporations reap many of the benefits of being considered as an individual, such as having limited liability and accountability for the shareholders, but then they don't receive the same punishments as humans would. They can't be imprisoned, they can only be sued. That gives companies the incentive to make strategic decisions, weighing the risks and benefits of being unethical. The risk being getting sued and the benefit being getting away with the action and earning money. Since their main objective is to maximize profit, this type of decision involving ethical boundaries is simply seen as another economic decision.
The detachment between humans and businesses are not mainly focused on benefiting the world as a whole. We can see that in the example of the shareholders, since the shareholders, their relationship with the businesses is mainly looking at the numbers, looking at their benefits, and well, they don't understand day-to-day activities, which might have some consequences such as damaging the environment, damaging the nature, damaging the people, damaging the world as whole. But why they don't understand, why they don't look at is because there is no direct relationship between these two. So for the shareholders, there is no direct relationship for them with those consequences. Well, obviously we know that for our world, it's better to make everything good for whole the world, which is taking the long term. But in general, what we can see is human beings they focus on mainly the short term objectives. But you can ask why. Well, we can go to the example of the corporate systems. Well, for the corporate system, there is a definition for them is what they say is, in a way, when there is an unethical behavior, it's better for everyone is just look at a different direction. It's, let's say, kind of ignore the unethical behavior, but you can ask why to do that. Why the system mentions this behavior. We can go for an example which might explain that more clearly in detail. So imagine that there is a company in a specific market and it has some competitors, but this specific company it is way more ethical than its competitors, and it has all the ethical behaviors. Well, at the end, what's happening is for this specific company, it might have way more cost than its competitors. So that might bring some negative effects to that specific competitor, even if it's ethical and if it's doing something good. To explain that explanation better and as a resume, in a way, what we are trying to say is the system, that specific system, rewards you for being bad, but at the same time, the same system punishes you for being good.
So when looking at the impact of some of the corporations' sometimes reckless behavior, we can identify certain groups that were particularly harmed by it. The first one would be the workers. As a consequence of corporations trying to maximize their profits, layoffs started becoming more and more common. And that was not just during financially challenging times, but rather whenever there was a possibility that doing so could potentially increase profits in the long run. Workers' unions either weren't taken seriously or were destroyed entirely, and even sweatshops and child labor in foreign countries started to become more and more appealing as it helped companies lower their costs and therefore maximize profits. Honduras is one of the main examples for this, where in a Nike factory, workers were given 6.6 minutes to produce a t-shirt and were then paid 8 cents for this. To put this into perspective, that equals an hourly pay of roughly 73 cents. The next and another group that was also very affected by some of the actions taken of the corporations, of course, we're only talking the ones mentioned in the movie, not generalizing, were the people. Some of the corporations mentioned not only experimented with ingredients that turned out to be cancerous, yet they continued using them anyway. Synthetic ingredients added to food, toxic waste, as well as pollution, both had a serious effect on the final consumers and the people living around the factories, but helped companies lower their costs and therefore increase the money they made. As well as animals. Animals were also severely affected as they were used for experimentation and had their natural habitat destroyed. Monsanto is perhaps the best example for this, and also unfortunately a prime example for some corporations' disregard for human and animal well-being. The artificial hormones were produced and sold by Monsanto under the name Posilac, which were intended to increase cow's milk production. The hormones, though, led to very painful infections in the cow's uterus, and it was common that some of the pus would end up inside the milk, which is kind of disgusting if you think about it. But on top of that, the bacteria coming from the pus, as well as the hormones that were passed on by the cow, were known to cause a number of serious health conditions up unto cancer. Even though Monsanto was very aware of that, or was at least made aware of the fact that this is happening, they did not stop manufacturing, selling, or using, or even advertising Posilac any time after that happened.
As addition to what Benedict said, it all began in 1940s when all the new type of synthesis in chemicals came to the world. In order to stay competitive and cost efficient, all producers started taking the molecules of oil in order to produce any type of synthetic chemicals for any purpose. The use of synthetic chemicals reached the enormous levels because due to the new era of R&D, people started producing daily using products such as toothbrushes, having lower cost, however incurring pollution. There are hundreds of companies which commit environmental violation causing pollution. As was mentioned before, pollution caused by hundreds of companies affect indirectly the well-being of people and animals living in the world. All the toxic waste is spread daily, however, it might affect the lives of the future generation. The large viruses and infection epidemics are caused indirectly due to the nuclear waste. Furthermore, about the environmental pollution, there are more and more toxin evidences that also the climate change is caused by the rising level of CO2 emissions. Moreover, as for the countries and governments, the capitalist state of mind drastically increased around the world. Looking at the politics and governments nowadays, we can conclude that almost 80% of politicians are seeking for the gain, forgetting the state of the nation. Many actions are taken without thinking about the well-being of the population of the country. The nature of 90% of people is sadly described as egoistic. Nations are suffering because of the world decision made by the governments. Every decision nowadays turned out to be the business decision leading to a potential gain, as it was said in the movie. People thinking we're flying, but they're truly in a free fall. That means that always should be an alternative thinking to business one.
We believe that the nature of the corporation has not changed. The nature of the corporation, all else equal, like mentioned before, is to make as much profit as possible while complying to the law. What we think has evolved is the behaviors of the consumers and the relationship between the government and the corporations. When it comes to the relationship between the governments and corporations, this has been seen in recent years, as large corporations like Amazon, Apple, Nike, and others have grown to become colossal companies. Companies like this operate in many parts of the world. Many of the times, they set up their factories in third world countries. As they bring so much work and capital inflows to these countries, they have become almost necessary for the countries in which they operate. And therefore, there's an incentive to take advantage of the situation. Companies like this may have the ability to pay low wages and provide poor working conditions for their employees. And they are able to do this because the country in which they operate is dependent on the capital inflows and work from these corporations. Why not impose regulations on them? Well, companies have high negotiating power simply because they have other alternatives with regard to the location of their operations. This is when they can take advantage of the situation. That said, we believe that in order to attack this problem, there has to be aligned incentives between the governments, the communities, and the companies. Potential solutions to this may be imposing subsidies that incentivize good working conditions and higher salaries, or regulations to prevent this. In order to avoid them leaving the country, we believe that all countries must be in harmony of what they want for the people, and how they can avoid the aforementioned problems that arise with corporations having too much power. Another factor of corporations that is evolving is the change of behavior from consumers. When it comes to the change in the consumer's behavior, this has changed dramatically. First of all, consumers now have more information about the company's supply chain, and it is now of more importance to them to be buying products that come from responsible supply chains. This has caused a change in corporations, as they have realized that it is in the company's best interest to be more responsible, as it will create a better image and therefore yield higher returns to shareholders. An example of this is the rise of corporate responsibility. Now, almost every company has a section in their website that is dedicated to corporate responsibility. This section of the website details the positive impacts that the companies have had on the community, the environment, work-life balance, diversity, compliance, and their employees. In conclusion, we believe the nature of the corporation has evolved mainly in two ways. First of all, the relationship between the government and the corporations. Now, governments depend on the corporations producing in their countries like it did not happen before. The solutions are the ones that we mentioned before. And secondly, now companies have a stronger and closer relationship with the consumer, because the consumer now has more information about the company and their stakeholders. It is in the company's best interest to have a good relationship with their consumers, because they know that this will create higher profits for the shareholders.
Now I will talk about the 5 features of a modern corporation drawn from the video we just saw. First feature of a modern corporation is that they spend excessively on branding. It's not just the service and products they provide, but also the image, the brand name, the lifestyle, this kind of perception they created. Companies spend billions and millions of dollars on creating this brand name through partnership, ambassador, sponsorship, social media marketing. So this could be a misrepresentation of what they're actually selling to you. The second feature of a modern corporation is it's extremely global. That means their supply chain could be global. The production of factories could be located in a different country. Their customer base could be extremely global. Even those two elements are domestic for your corporation is still a global business. Why? As it is demonstrated by the global pandemic, every single corporation is affected because our economy is so intertwined with each other on a global scale. The third feature of a modern corporation is it's subject to and accountable for public opinions. As it was mentioned by my colleague Christian, that due to this evolution of customer demands, companies really need to tailor to this change in customer demand. You cannot talk about business today without a social element, and your public perception, your share price will be very much affected if you don't take care of that social perspective. The fourth element of modern corporation is its increasing interaction with the government. And that means for 2 levels. First, on the government side, they're increasingly dependent on these corporations. They want the corporation to stay within the country or the city to keep the jobs and investment. But at the same time, it means that companies and government are working together to develop new projects, new technology. For example, Google has been working with United States military for years to develop a artificial intelligence system. Now, the last feature of modern corporation is increase in transparency. And again, demanded by public opinions, companies really need to disclose their, different stages of their supply chain. Customers really want to know what they are buying into. So this transparency is censored by various agencies providing their certificates on their sustainability standard. So thank you so much for listening to our presentation, discussion on corporations, and hope you have found it useful.